as workers and as entrepreneurs are hopefully going to be better able to use their assets and the activities they carry out to improve their livelihoods. That's essentially what we are talking about. And that's the agenda of this commission. I then move on to share with you a flavor of the kinds of recommendations that the commission will put out. Under the area of access to justice and rule of law, we will be recommending that governments begin to look at the laws on the books, some of which might be, in fact, be anti-poor. While working and consulting in India, for example, one found books and volumes written on laws which work against the poor. Not only were these laws not helpful to the poor, they were in fact harmful. We will recommend that governments might take a hard look at laws which are working for the poor and those who are working against the poor, and see whether in fact one can begin to make these laws more inclusive and more supportive of poverty reduction and helping poor people. We also will make a number of recommendations on how to help poor people gain greater access to the existing legal system, but also recommendations on how to reform the system and increase capacity. Small sample, we have a complete expert report on this subject, which I'm happy to make available to the Secretariat or to member states if you so desire. In the area of property rights, we are, as you know, property rights is already a part of the Human Rights Declaration. Article 17, in fact, says that all people, whether individually or collectively, should be able to own property and be able to use that property to their own benefit. But we are going to show how property, in fact, property rights can help poor people get out of poverty. A quick note on that one before I move to the next, and that is we have felt at the beginning of our work that if people had rights and titles to their property, they will be able to use those as collateral, go to the bank, get a loan, and be able to start businesses to help themselves get out of poverty. And some people do that. But what we found, in fact, in many countries, including, for example, in Argentina, was that poor people don't always want to use titles to their property and take that to the bank for collateral. Titles to their land and to their other property, in fact, are seen in a very different way. However, when people do have property rights, titles, etc., they invest in their property in a very different way. Their kids go to school for longer years, and social outcomes become quite different. And that is more common than using it as collateral. That was one of the counter-intuitive findings that we got. And all of this is presented on our Property Rights Expert Working Group. But let me move quickly and I illustrate there for you a whole range of issues with property rights. Our report is not focusing on property rights as individual private property alone. We recognize that many groups, indigenous peoples, for example, organize their lives through collective property rights, and that should be as meaningful and should be recognized as appropriate in certain circumstances. So we don't take a given Western model, if you like, about property rights, but we do argue that people should have the right to have property rights and should be able to use them within an inclusive legal system in which they can better their own lives. In the area of labor rights, again, as you would recognize by now, our work is focused largely at the extra-legal sector, at people who live in the informal economy to a large extent, and the enforcement of the existing labor standards. We're not creating any new standards. Most of these have already been agreed to internationally. But how do we work with these standards in the informal and the extra-legal sector is an area which needed attention, and we have a range of recommendations, as you will see, on that. With the basis that the data is pretty clear. Labor productivity in the extra-legal and informal sector is much lower than in in the informal sector than in the formal sector. And the data from Jamaica, from Argentina, from a whole range of countries will be presented in our reports and have been in fact done by others. We recognize, and we are not arguing, and I need to make it clear, that we are not arguing for an overnight formalization of the informal sector. That could in fact increase poverty and make poor people worse off. We have to gradually move to a system in which people are, over time, they see the net benefits of working within the law and the virtuous circle that that will create, and then move forward. If we attempt to create formalization overnight when we do not have the institutions through which people will be able to reap net benefits, then we could make the problem worse. And our report will recognize that. In the area of small and medium businesses, a lot of small and medium businesses in this region are in fact, again, outside the rule of the law. Many people don't recognize or rather bother to register their businesses, their small businesses, for a whole range of reasons. I might mention quickly in passing that I was born in Guyana and in fact now Canadian, so I am a citizen of 2 of the member states of the OAS. In Guyana, a very large number, maybe 80% or more of all business activity is not registered and is in the informal sector. We've checked this with both non-governmental organizations and government colleagues. In Canada, I was shocked when I heard from the Canadian Bar Association about the law not working for poor Canadians. So even in the developed world, there is work to be done in working with a range of these issues. And here we have made a range again of recommendations which you can go through at length in the area of how to work with small and medium businesses especially, and how to get them to begin to work with the law. You are not able to leverage your assets unless you are able to work with the law. Someone has said that perhaps the most important invention ever of the law was the firm, F-I-R-M, because it allows the owner of a firm to raise money from people they don't even know. When you work in the informal sector, you essentially have to raise capital through microcredit or through family and friends. Now, microcredit has made a revolution. But those of us who are familiar with microcredit will also know that the interest rates that poor people pay for microcredit is of the order of 30 to 35% per annum. That is really very high. And the reason is obvious. It's because you have non-collateral interests that you are seeking. Non-collateral backed interest. We have to be able to move to regulate a banking system in which poor people can also have interest rates that you and I benefit from. Legal empowerment is not about to replace all the other important development work you're doing, that we are doing in the UN or elsewhere. It is about complementing a lot of that work. And I have in fact been in discussions with Mr. Quiñones here in your secretariat, in your integral development group, and we are discussing how this agenda will in fact help to move forward the work in development being already supported by the OAS. We will be working with the multilateral system. There are a whole range of them who are already involved in our work, and I wouldn't go through these in any detail, just to let you know that we are working with many of these actors, and that they are ready. The Secretary General, for example, is prepared to receive our report. We will have our final meeting on February 6th to 8th, after which we will finalize the report. So the launches and so on will take place soon thereafter, sometime in the spring. Let me conclude just by moving quickly. So what are some of the areas, I hope, and how we might go forward working with your member states? Mr. Chairman, I have just raised